Hey there everybody, Sage Apopum here, founder of Organic Unity and the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. And the other day I got an email from someone who was asking me a question about their path in herbal medicine. And his question was so good that I thought that I would just go ahead and shoot a video on it, because I realized that my answer to this question would probably benefit everyone that is walking a plant path and is focusing on studying herbal medicine and working with plants to heal themselves, their families, their communities, their clients and patients, and ultimately to have a positive impact on the world. And I was getting ready to reply to this email, and I was like, man, my reply is going to be so long. It would be way easier for me to just shoot a video on it. So just for that, on that note, if any of you ever have something that you'd like for me to talk about here on the blog or on our YouTube channel or in our podcast, feel free to drop us a line. Say, hey, can you talk about this? Or I've got some questions about this. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions on that. So I want to read the question to you because I think it's a question a lot of you all might have. And it says, I'm trying to gain an understanding of things on a deeper level and make my first steps onto the path that I seem to have been steered towards. Here's where I have a question. You seem to regard your relationship with herbs as something more of a kinship than seeing them as tools of the trade. I have never been a spiritual sort, and I wouldn't know how to meditate or find inner peace if someone drew me a roadmap and volunteered to drive me to it. As odd as it may sound, I would like to gain that sort of relationship with herbs, except that I don't know how. I was wondering if you had any suggestions for my question, or if you have any suggestions whatsoever with my proceeding forward in this field. All right, first off, want to say thank you to Frank for sending your really good question here. And so what I want to share with you here is what I see as 5 steps towards a deeper connection with your herbal remedies. And I know I've talked about this before in the past, like establishing relationships with plants and deepening in your direct connection and relationship with them, but I have talked about it maybe from a little bit more of a spiritual perspective. And so in this video, what I want to share is 5 really practical means on how you can really deepen in your connection with your plants and to really understand them, to have a relationship with them. I love what he says here is the way you work with plants, it seems like it's more of a kinship than seeing them as tools of the trade. And I just love the way that he put that. And it's so spot on. Like, to me, a plant isn't just a tool that I pick up and use and throw back on the workbench when I'm done using it. It's a relationship, right? It's like, you know, we're talking about a life. When we're talking about a plant, we're talking about a living, sentient being, right? That has consciousness, it has feeling, it has purpose, it has intelligence. And to me, I always kind of think of, you know, for me, I think of plants like people, you know, it's like if you don't nourish a relationship with a person, then it's going to wither. And it might be, you know how it is. It's like if you don't see someone in a number of years and you bump into them at the co-op or the grocery store, it's like, hey, and it kind of creates this little bit of an awkward moment, right? And it's because that relationship hasn't been nourished, it hasn't been tended to, it hasn't been cared for. And to me, I think of my relation, just for myself, I think of my relationships to the plants as being very similar to that. So here's 5 ways that I see ways that you can establish a connection to a plant, that you can deepen in your relationships to maybe plants that you already work with. But before I do that, I just want to acknowledge something about working with plants, in the sense that it's like what you give is what you get. And we can't expect to understand and know everything that there is to know about a plant simply through reading about it or simply through working with it for a short period of time. It's like a person, right? It's like, the more you put into that relationship, the more you discover about that person, the deeper and stronger that connection is. And it's the same way with your herbal medicines. And to me, it's like, we have to nourish those relationships. We have to tend to those relationships, and we can't expect to have that deeper level of connection by being what my teacher Matthew Wood always describes as being an armchair herbalist, right? Just sitting in the armchair, reading the books and studying them that way. It's like that only can really get you so far. And what I really want to talk about here in this video is kind of your experiential way of learning about a plant, really taking it out of theory and into practice, into embodied knowledge, right? Into an embodied sense of your own experience with that plant. Because it's one thing to read about how bitter motherwort is. I just did a 3-hour video yesterday for our Materia Medica Monthly program on motherwort. So motherwort's been on my mind. It's like one thing to read about motherwort's a bitter. Oh, okay, yeah, I've got to remember that. I've got to memorize that motherwort is a bitter. But boy, make a cup of motherwort tea and drink it, and you will forever know how bitter motherwort really, really is. And how, for most people, that cup of tea is pretty tough to get to the bottom of, right? Because it's very, very bitter. And so that gives you a skill set. It gives you a knowledge of, oh, if I want to give motherwort to someone, maybe giving it to them as a tea may not be the best route of administration, because, your general typical person probably isn't going to like the taste. Your compliance is going to be low, and that's not something that you can understand just by reading about it in a book, right? That's only something that you can achieve through experiencing that plant directly yourself. So with that, let's jump in to our 5 steps for a deeper connection with your plant. And the first thing that I want to talk about here is what I'm going to loosely refer to as direct experience. And that's a really kind of a vague phrase, but it encompasses a couple pieces of it. What I mean here is actually being with the physical live growing plant, right? Not the dried thing in a jar, not the tincture, but the actual living growing plant, ideally in its wild habitat, not in a garden or not, on the sidewalk, but actually going out in the wild and finding that plant. And there's something about engaging with the plant with your senses that really establishes that connection. And this doesn't have to be a spiritual thing. I mean, to me, it is a very spiritual thing, but maybe you're not spiritually inclined, right? Maybe you're a very analytical, linear, reductionistic scientist. That's okay. It's through seeing the plant and seeing where it grows and being in a relationship to it, like actually being with it. It just establishes something that's very precious, I think, to all herbalists. And one thing that's been evading me that I actually wanted to talk about before I get into this framework here, so I'm going to backtrack for a split second here, is being aware of the plants that kind of come up for you. And, there's something very interesting with the vegetable realm where there's kind of like this interesting dynamic with synchronicity, where certain plants will kind of call your name at certain times in your life. Certain plants will surface for you at different periods of your life, different phases of your plant path. And I always feel like it's very important, and I always encourage my students to be very aware of that, right? If for some reason you're just like, man, I am just so interested in rose hips, like I don't know why, I'm just very curious about rose hips. Well, don't go study black cohosh, go study rose hips, right? It's like that plant speaking to you. There's something there for you to learn, I would say, about that plant as well as about yourself through that plant. And so I always say it's better to know, 20 remedies inside and out, to know 20 remedies really, really well, how to prepare them, how to harvest them, how to administer them, how to dose them, all their different properties and applications. I would rather know that about 20 plants in depth than know 200 plants superficially. And so, my encouragement to people that are just getting into herbal medicine is study those herbs that seem really interesting to you. The ones that you're just like, well, that sounds really cool. Or maybe you have a certain health condition and this one herb keeps popping up and it seems like that would be an herb that could help you. Study those plants. Those are the herbs those are the ones that are calling to you. Those are the ones that, the way I see it, there's some sort of resonance there between the soul of that plant and your own soul. There's something that you can learn from that remedy. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that to really do this with the herbs that speak to you. Okay, so direct experience. So sensory observation, right? We want to really engage with our senses with that plant. So I always encourage people to visit that plant in its natural habitat multiple times during its growth cycle, right? So you want to see that plant when, maybe when it's just starting to leaf, and then when it's starting to grow out, and then when it's starting to flower, and when it produces its fruit, and when it sets seed. You want to connect to the plant during those different cycles of its growth, just to see it, right? Just to see what it looks like, right? I mean, think about it. This is a living being that you want to use to heal yourself or to heal other people. And I think one of the best ways to have a relationship to it, a deeper connection to it, is to witness it, right? To witness it, to observe it in its life. Right? I mean, isn't that how we get to know a person better? Right? I mean, it's one thing to know a person when they're just like feeling awesome all the time, or maybe the only time you hang out with someone is like at parties. Well, you only see one side of that person when you're at a party or when you're in big group dynamics, but you see a whole other facet of that person when it's just you and them sitting over coffee, or when they're having a hard time. Maybe someone's having a hard time in their life and they turn to you and they say, hey, can I talk to you? I need some support right now. Wow, that relationship takes on this whole other level when you see that person in a different place. The same is true with the plants. So, I remember this became very clear to me when I was studying at Bastyr University. Bastyr's in a really cool place outside of Seattle in the middle of St. Edward State Park. So it's surrounded by this beautiful forest right around Lake Washington. And in order to kind of clear my head from all the, lectures and stuff, college basically, I would wander through the forest quite a bit. And there's a lot of elderberry, the Sambucus racemosa, the red elderberry, growing in that area. And I spent a lot of time with that elderberry, just observing it, being with it, sitting with it, just kind of spending a lot of time with it. I was just like, I really like this plant. It's cool, And I remember one day I went walking through the forest and all of a sudden the elders were flowering. And it was like, I remember it so distinctly, it was like, it was late spring, summertime, and the sun was shining. And I remember walking through this dappled sunlight forest, and all of a sudden I came upon where the elders were, and all this dappled sunlight was like shining down on these beautiful, bright, white, inflorescences, all these tiny little white flowers, and it just like, it took my breath away. It was so beautiful. I was like, wow, like I'd never seen this being that I was having this relationship with. I'd never seen it in that phase of its development, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was very kind of an emotional thing for me. And I remember getting up there and looking at the flowers and seeing the little, like, they look like little starlight shining out, and the way they've got the little bulbous heads on the stamens is just so beautiful. And I remember in that moment, it was like, wow, like my appreciation for the beauty of that plant took on a whole other level. And so this is why I always encourage people to engage in sensory observation with their plants, to have that deeper connection, so you actually know what it looks like, right? I mean, I can't tell you how, there's a lot of herbalists out there, there's a lot of NDs out there that use all of these plants, and they don't even know what they look like. They don't even know their smell. They don't even know. And obviously, you know, sometimes we work with Chinese medicines or Ayurvedic medicines, or, you know, certain herbs that maybe don't grow in your environment, or you can't grow them. So it's like, I get it. We can't always have this kind of experience with all of the remedies that people use, because, I mean, essentially, most practitioners these days are using a global materia medica, right? Plants from all over the world. So I get it, and I don't want anyone to feel guilty about that. But the remedies that you can have this experience with it, it's a critical way to deepen in your relationship with the plants. And another facet of this, it could probably be a whole other point, but whenever you feel comfortable, wildcraft that plant. You know, pick those elder flowers, right? Pick the elderberries, not the red ones, but right? It's like, if you really want to have a relationship with the medicine, you want to have an experience with the plant, well, harvesting the medicine yourself, to me, is always going to be the best medicine, especially for your own health. But also for a client that you're treating, because you have a connection with the exact medicine that you're giving to them. Now, there's a whole lot around wildcraft protocol and things like that I don't want to get into here. It's kind of, that's a different, I'll shoot another video on wildcrafting. I haven't really talked about that too much. But I always just say, you know, if you feel guilty about wildcrafting, don't do it, right? If you shouldn't be picking a plant with this like guilt, or like be apologizing, oh, I'm sorry, you know. It's like, that's not the way to wildcraft, right? That when we're wildcrafting, we always want to do it with a deep reverence, respect, gratitude, humility. We always want to give back, make offerings, make prayers. To me, that's just doing it in an integral way. So if you don't feel comfortable wildcrafting, then certainly don't do it. And obviously, of course, make sure that you have properly identified the plant, that you're not picking something that is the wrong plant or a potential poisonous plant. This is especially true of our Apiaceae, or the carrot family. That's where we get our, you know, deadly poisonous plants, water hemlock, poison hemlock, etc. So you obviously know what you're doing. Make sure you've properly ID'd that plant. But if you feel comfortable and confident in your ability to wildcraft a medicine, I highly, highly encourage that process. And kind of juxtaposed to that is medicine making. Make a medicine out of it, right? Maybe that's just taking it home and boiling a root and making a tea and drinking that tea, right? It's like, now you're taking that whole connection that you made with the plant out in the forest and in the fields and in the mountains and the valleys, and you're bringing that into your body, right? You're connecting to that plant by making a medicine out of it. And, you know, I always say the best medicine is the medicine that you prepare yourself. And whether that's a tea, or whether that's a tincture, or whether that's a powder, or whatever it is, I always say that the best medicine for you is the medicine that you gather yourself, because that connection is there. There's an added power in that medicine that you prepare yourself from plants that you pick yourself, that just, in my opinion, surpasses anything else. Some people might disagree with me on that. That's totally cool. That's just my personal perspective and opinion on it. And to me, medicine making is just a critical aspect of herbal medicine. You know, learning how to make tinctures, make infusions, make decoctions, make infused oils, to learn how to properly dry plants and preserve them so that you can use them at a later date. Making an annual batch of elderberry syrup, right? We're getting ready to do that out here, and it's just wonderful because it's improving your skills as an herbalist. And to me, a true herbalist knows how to make some of their own home remedies. I feel like it's a very important element of being a true herbalist, and not relying on tincture companies or capsules or powders or tablets that you just go buy at the store. There's a disconnect there. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I don't want anyone to take me the wrong way and think I'm bashing herbal products and things like that. No, they're great. There's a lot of really great herbal products companies out there that they work very, very well. But remember the context here. We're talking about deepening in your connection to a plant. And when you make a medicine from a plant that you wildcraft yourself, that you experienced yourself in nature, you have a connection to that plant. And every time you take a couple drops of that medicine, it kind of brings all of that back, and you're having a deeper connection to it. And with that, I say not just medicine making, but medicine taking. I love the way Steve Buhner puts this. He says, you got to put your medicine where your mouth is. And, again, this is getting out of that armchair herbalism of just learning about a plant by reading about it. But I think the best way to really anchor in the intellectual information that we get through study, to really anchor that into our body and into an experience, is to actually take the plant. So to really taste the herb is one of the best ways to learn about an herbal medicine. Because like I said, it's one thing to read about, elderflower being a relaxant diaphoretic or something that can help to clear the upper respiratory system. It's one thing to read that in a book. It's another thing to drink a hot infusion of it and to feel yourself get a little sweaty, or to feel your sinuses clear, right? It's like all of a sudden you know it because you experience it. You're not just taking someone's word for it, right? You've experienced it. It's embodied knowledge. And to me, that's what differentiates a true herbalist from everyone else, is that a true herbalist has an embodied knowledge of their plants. And I think if there's one point that I want to make in this video, is that that's really what this is all about. Embodied knowledge. Not intellectual information, but embodied knowledge. And one of the best ways to get embodied knowledge of a plant is to take the plant into your body, right? So that you feel the effect, you taste it, you feel the way it's impacting all of your organs and systems and tissues. You feel the way it's influencing your mind. You feel the way it stirs your emotions. You start to notice things changing in your whole being. And the more that we can become sensitized to that process, the better. And one of the practices that I really like for deepening in this part of the process is actually a practice that is basically the main way a plant is studied in many traditional peoples in the Amazon region, is through a process that they call Dieta. And the Dieta basically is a practice in Amazonian herbalism where they will restrict certain foods from their diet. And the way that I have come to understand that is that they're restricting the four elements of the different tastes from their diet. So predominantly very hot, spicy, pungent foods like the fire element, very salty foods like the water element, very sweet foods like sugars and things like that, the earth element, and then very sour foods of the air element. And so they're restricting those, it's like if you're eating a lot of hot, pungent, spicy foods, you're kind of in the fire element more than the others. So when you limit those, restrict those tastes out of your diet, you kind of come to the center point of those elements, and it makes your body very, very sensitive. Traditionally, foods eaten here were just very simple, bland foods like boiled chicken or rice or boiled plantains or yucca. Very simple, kind of bland, starchy foods. But what this does is it makes your system very sensitive when you take a particular medicine. So traditionally they would spend sometimes prolonged periods of time. And I remember, some herbalists that I spoke with down there, they would do this for a whole year with just one plant. And what this does is that you're only taking that plant into your body. You're not taking any other herbs. You're just eating a very kind of simple mono diet, and you're taking this plant so you can become very aware of how it is, who it is, how its medicine functions, its virtues, its physical qualities, as well as its spiritual qualities alongside with that. Now, of course, there's a whole lot of other factors around the Dieta. For those of you that have maybe heard of the Dieta, of course, this is a very big element also of traditional Amazonian shamanism and the practice of using ayahuasca and things like that. But separate from that, this is just how they learn their plants, right? I mean, a lot of the Dieta practices are really like, oh, this is an ayahuasca thing, which it is for sure, but this is also just how they learn their plants, right? This is their herb school. I mean, I remember being down in the Amazon and going on plant walks and talking to a lot of herbalists and asking them about these trees and the barks and how they're used and the nature of the medicine. And they were always very hesitant to share too much. Basically, all they would say is, oh, you just need to do a dieta. You just need to diet with that plant and let that plant tell you itself. Because like I can tell you, but you'll probably forget. And that information is just, it's not going to stick. But when you learn that information from the plant, it's embodied knowledge. So it anchors it more deeply, and then you really know it. And to me, that learning from a plant itself, a lot of times we think of that as like, oh, it's this very esoteric spiritual thing. Learning from a plant is like you drank it and you felt it stimulate digestion. Well, it's like you just learned from that plant through your experience. So it doesn't have to be this way out there kind of thing. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that very briefly here as a great practice to just maybe take 2 weeks to eat a very simple kind of bland diet, and to drink the tea or take the tincture or the flower essence, or to take a bath with the plant, or however many different ways that you can get that plant into your system. This is a very profound way of deepening your connection to that plant. The fourth part here is, so taking the medicine yourself, but administering it to other people. And of course, you only want to do this when you feel comfortable and competent and competent to give herbal medicines to other people. But I always say, not to hold back. I think a lot of people hold back their knowledge and practice of herbal medicine for fear that they're going to hurt someone, or they don't know enough, or that they aren't qualified. But if you know of a plant that is beneficial for something that a friend or family member is going through, by all means give it to them, right? Help them out. I think it's our duty and our job as herbalists that as we grow and advance on our plant path, that there's a certain responsibility that goes along with it, where we have to start helping other people with the plants. I mean, what's the point of learning all this stuff if we're not going to help someone else out in their time of need? So obviously taking a plant yourself, you learn a lot about it through your own experience. But man, once you start administering that plant to other people, seeing how it affects them, does it make their symptom better? Does it make their symptom worse? Did it make them cold? Did it make them hot? Did it make them wet? Did it make them dry? You learn so much about that plant. And so I always encourage people to administer plants to other people when it's appropriate and when you have the competence and the confidence to do so. And lastly, and I would say here too, I just kind of mentioned it as a side note, when you're taking a plant yourself or administering it to another person, you really want to become acutely aware of those energetics. So hot, cold, wet, dry is a very important thing to pay attention to. So it's like, okay, I've been drinking the Oregon grape tea every day for 2 weeks, and my eyes are dry, my mouth is dry, my stomach's dry, and everything my skin's all dry or something, right? You start to really see, oh, if someone is like crazy dry, maybe I don't want to give this herb to them over a long-term period of time. So there's really good practical knowledge from experiencing a plant in that way. Now, the last piece here, and this is kind of the no-brainer, it's study, right? That we want to experience a plant directly for ourselves in order to have embodied knowledge, but that doesn't mean that we have to throw away, the vast amount of resources that are available to us after hundreds or thousands of years of other people's experiences of direct experience, sensory observation, wildcrafting, medicine making, medicine taking, and administering, right? People have learned a lot about plants over the years, and there's no reason why we can't learn from them, right? It's like, I love what Paul Bergner says. He says, if you're going to reinvent the wheel, it's probably going to be round. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't got to start from scratch. We can learn a lot from the collective body of knowledge of herbal medicine available to us, which is greater than it's ever been before, ever in the history of the world. I mean, we can, in here, I am in Southern Oregon, I can go right over here to my bookshelf and learn about herbs from Ayurvedic medicine, from Chinese medicine, from South America, from Haiti, like all of these herbs that, a couple hundred years ago, people would probably in the West had probably never heard of. So we have more information available to us now than ever before, which is a blessing, but it's also a challenge too, because sometimes, especially with the internet, we got to weed through I don't want to necessarily say misinformation, but maybe not the most holistic information about plants. And so when you're studying an herbal medicine, and this is especially for people that are just getting started studying plants and wanting to have a deeper understanding of plants, the three main things that I say you really got to focus on when you're studying a plant. Well, the first thing that you don't focus on is what it's used for. And I know that sounds really weird, and that's the way most herb books are. You'll see these couple little sections, and then the bulk of the monograph will be what it's used for or what it's good for. I always encourage people getting started studying herbal medicine, try not to focus on that too much at first. The three main things that you really want to focus on when you're studying a plant is, what are the actions of the herb? Meaning, how is that herb going to adjust specific physiological processes in the body? So diuretic, diaphoretic, demulcent, emmenagogue, expectorant, etc. These types of actions. And you really want to sit down and think those actions through. And I always encourage my students too, a lot of times we kind of see actions as separate things, like, oh, it's diuretic over here, and it's diaphoretic over there, and it's expectorant over here, and it's emmenagogue over there. But the whole plant's doing all of that. So we want to try to see the synergy of those actions of, like, how are all of those actions coming together to create the net action of the plant, the net function or virtue of the plant. There's something that weaves together herbal actions into a cohesive whole. And when you can really understand an herb that way, you really get to understand kind of the deeper foundational property of that plant. So you really want to know the actions. You really want to study the affinities. So what are the main parts of the body that plant goes to? So is it basically what types of systems does it influence? Cardiovascular system, urinary system, hepatobiliary system, digestive system, respiratory system, etc. Then you have organs. Okay, is it specific to the kidneys or to the bladder? Or is it specific to the stomach or to the large intestine or to the liver or the gallbladder, right? So are there specific organs within systems that it influences? And then we want to look at tissues. So is it affecting the mucosa? Is it affecting smooth muscle? Is it affecting the nerve tissue? Is it affecting the blood? Is it affecting the lymph? Like what kind of tissue does that plant influence? And then third is the energetics, and I mentioned that earlier. That's going to be what are the humoral effects or the dosha effects or the tissue state effects of that plant. So is it warming? Is it cooling? Is it moistening? Is it drying? Is it relaxant? Is it astringent tonic? Is it increased pitta, vata, or kapha, to use kind of more Ayurvedic terminology? Is it useful for any of the 6 tissue states of the physiomedicalist, like heat excitation, cold depression, damp stagnation, dry atrophy, wind tension, or damp relaxation? And what these 3 things do is it gives you a holistic understanding of how that plant is influencing the human organism. From that, we take all this information and we put it together into clinical patterns, which is a bit of a fancier way of saying uses, right? What types of diseases or conditions is that plant used for? But it gets much more specific here. So when you bring together actions, affinities, and energetics, and then you say, okay, what are the constellations of symptoms or imbalances within a person that plant is going to holistically treat and address? So now you understand why it's used for certain conditions, not just that it's used for certain conditions. Like, a lot of people say like, oh, willow bark is good for headaches. Okay, why is willow bark good for headaches? What kind of headache is willow bark good for? Well, when we take the actions, affinities, and energetics into consideration, we learn a lot more about why willow bark is useful for headaches. Well, first off, it's a very strong bitter tonic and astringent plant. And it's working through the stomach predominantly, right? It's also working through the liver and through the blood. And the energetics, it's very cold and it's very dry. So it's very beneficial for a certain kind of headache and not beneficial for other kinds of headaches. This is why sometimes people take willow bark and they're like, yeah, it didn't do anything for me. Because it's useful for a particular pattern in the body. And we have to learn to understand the pattern in the plant and match the pattern in the plant to the pattern in the person based on their constellation of symptoms. So this is how I like to encourage people just getting started studying plants. Focus on these things first. Really unravel the meaning behind these and really think it through. Then take that and apply it to how it's used, and all of a sudden you have a deeper knowledge of how that plant is working and ultimately a deeper connection to that plant. I'm always doing this, like forever and ever and ever, the rest of my life. Every plant that I work with, these are the things that I personally do to have a deeper connection with my herbal medicines. So I hope that benefits you. I hope that provides some clarity and insight. Maybe some of you are just getting started on your plant path. This is where I encourage you to start with those herbs that are kind of jumping out at you and saying, hey, look at me, look at me. But for those of you that are more advanced and maybe already clinical practitioners or already been studying and using herbs for a long time, keep this on your dashboard, right? Maybe you've gone through a phase where you start to feel a little further away from your plants, right? Maybe you start to feel a little disconnected from them. Maybe you feel like something's missing, or like you want to reinvigorate your practice of herbal medicine. Right here, this is exactly what you need to do. You follow these 5 steps, and I guarantee you, you will start feeling a deeper, more solid connection and relationship with your plants. And I really tried to talk about this in a way that isn't very esoteric and spiritual. I mean, I could go into sitting with the plants and heart perception and praying and offerings and kind of visioning and all of that side, but I wanted to really land the plane here and talk about some very practical ways that you can deepen your relationships with plants for those of you that maybe don't have a spiritual inclination towards your herbal medicine. So thanks so much for checking out this video here. Please leave me a comment underneath here. If you've got any questions or comments, I'd love to check them out. Please check out this on our podcast. If you're not listening to the podcast, head on over to The Plant Path. You can check that out on iTunes as well as on Stitcher. And thanks so much for tuning in here. I do appreciate it. And until next time, take care and be well.